Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today we are going to talk about all of the books that I read in March. Before I get into the books, I did want to give you guys an update that my grandfather did pass away exactly 2 weeks ago today, after a very long battle with Alzheimer's. I know a lot of you guys have heard me talk about my relationship with him and how close we were on the channel before, and it has been a really hard 2 weeks. It has been a really hard last couple of years, actually, watching him go through this disease and how awful it is, and just doing our absolute best to love him in the last couple of years of his life. And I'm so thankful that we were able to be with him, and I was able to be with him almost up to the moment he passed. I'm still in the middle of grief, and I'm still in the middle of processing a lot of emotions, both about his passing and about the last couple of years of his life, and honestly our entire relationship for the last 34 years. I really truly appreciate all of the support and kindness and understanding from all of you throughout this entire journey as I've been sharing it with you, and I am happy to be back. I am excited to tell you about the books that I read in March and get back into the YouTube swing of things because it brings me a lot of joy. So with that out of the way, we're gonna start with a large pile of manga that I read in March. I did a 24-hour reading challenge where I read nothing but manga and graphic novels, which was really, really fun. If you want to watch that video, it's going to be right up here in the cards. You can go check that out. It was so much fun. I had a blast doing it. And also, that was a lot of manga. I was a little cross-eyed by the time we were done. So first, I am going to share with you guys the 2 books that I DNF'd in March. The first one was during my manga reading challenge, and that was I Want to Eat Your Pancreas by Yoru Sumino and Idumi Kirihara. This one, I've been told it's a really cute story, and I completely believe that. It was just not landing for me. This one, it was very melodramatic in a childish way, I felt at the beginning, and there was some really cringy, tropey stuff going on, and I just wasn't feeling it. So this one I did end up DNFing. That was the only one I DNF'd during my manga challenge. And the other book that I DNF'd in March was The Daughter's War by Christopher Buehlman. This one I had gone back and forth about because I really liked the premise of it, but I started reading it, and within the first few pages, the tone of the story was just one I could tell I was not going to jive with. I did not like the character voice that much. I didn't really like the writing style that much. So I put it down. And as you guys know, I am working really hard here in 2026 to DNF books that are just not working for me a little faster, because I want to get to the books that could end up being new favorites. So those were my 2 DNFs for March. So let's get into the manga that I read, and I'm going to talk about these as series. So I'm not going to talk about individual volumes. I'm going to talk about the entire series at once. So I read 2 omnibus volumes of Erased by Kei Sanbei. This is the second series I've tried from Kei Sanbei, and I really enjoyed this. Enjoyed is a tough word to use with content like this, but I thought it was really well done, and Kei Sanbei is handling a very, very sensitive content topic in here, and for the most part, I actually think that he's walking that line and balancing it pretty well. So in the beginning of Erased, we meet Satoru Fujinama, who is our main character, and he's a young man at the time that we meet him, and he has this magical, it's not really a power because he doesn't have control over it, but it sends him back in time whenever he comes across a physical location where something really bad is about to happen, and it will send him back in time over and over again until he can stop it from happening. So of course, in the very beginning of the first volume, he, stops a horrible accident from happening on the road. And as we get further and further in, we realize that he doesn't really have much control over this, and it just sort of happens to him, and he's never sure when it's going to happen or why, until it sends him very far back in time after an incident that has some tie-ins with a horrible situation that he was privy to back in his childhood, which was the abduction and murder of a young classmate of his. So it sends him all the way back in time to stop this original catastrophe from ever happening. And it's heavy. There's some heavy stuff in here, and it's very clear from this series that Kei Sanbei is not interested in pulling punches, but he's doing it in a way that really puts the survivors and the young characters in the front and center in a positive way, in my opinion. And he's tackling this topic with a lot of care and responsibility from what I can tell so far. And there are 3 more volumes to this series that I do intend to continue with. But overall, I really enjoyed these. I think that they're really well done. I like Kei Sanbei's art style, and I am definitely going to be continuing with the series. I also got caught up on Spy Family by Tatsuya Endo with volumes 14 and 15. This one, we actually go a little bit back in time and we find out some of the backstory of some of the older characters of this story. Our headmaster from the private academy where Anya is going to school, and somebody that was in his life previously. And this is a really beautiful character arc. I think this is one of my favorite sets of volumes since earlier on in the series, to be honest, because we get a little bit more of the history of the country that we're in. We go back in time before we meet our main characters, and we get to see some of what led us to the point that we're at, and the tensions between the West and the East and all of that kind of thing. And at the heart of it is a kind of tragic love story, and it's really beautiful and it's really heartbreaking, and I loved it. So definitely a big fan of pretty much everything about these 2 volumes, and I'm looking forward to reading the next volume when it comes out. But overall, still highly recommend Spy Family. It is a great series. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I think we're starting to get to some more depth now that we're about halfway through the series. Erased wasn't the only series by Kei Sanbei that I read during my manga challenge. I also continued Island in a Puddle, which is another series of his, 5 volumes long, so it's very short, and I had volumes 2 and 3, had already read 1. And this is the story of a body swap, essentially. There's a young boy and his little sister who've been essentially abandoned by their mother, and the young boy is trying his best to be a parent for his little sister, to keep them both safe, to keep them both fed, to get them to school, all of these sorts of things. And conversely, there is a young man who is deeply embedded in the criminal underworld of the city. He's an assassin. He's a kind of a horrible person. And during the first book, there is a lightning storm that happens and a body swap. And it's the themes that Sanbei is working on in here are also very interesting. I don't find this series to be nearly as deep as Erased is. I don't like it as much. And I'm not going to DNF the series because there are only 2 volumes left of the series, and I'm very curious to see how he's going to wrap all this up in 2 volumes. But I definitely like Erased a lot better. There were some things, especially in volume 2, that I always get nervous about with body swap stories where I'm like, please tell me the author's not going to go here. And he did, and I didn't love it. But it was still an okay read. I read them pretty quickly, and I am curious to see how he's going to wrap it all up in volumes 4 and 5. After that, I needed something lighthearted, and I binged through 3 volumes of Cat plus Gamer by Wataru Nadatani. This series, you guys, is so precious. I can't handle it. I love this so much. The premise of this story is that a late 20-something office worker named Riko, who has a super routine, basic lifestyle. She's single, she works her 9 to 5, and then she goes home and she video games, and she is a serious video gamer. And all of a sudden, her life is upended when someone brings a stray kitten into the office, and nobody else can take him. So Riko adopts him, takes him home, and it is the story of somebody being a cat owner for the first time and learning all of the quirks and isms that come with being a cat owner, and not just a cat owner, but a kitten owner for the first time. And it is so sweet and so precious. It kind of marries just enough of that wholesome cat parent content with the nerdy gamer girl culture, and I love the combination of those two things so much. Riko and her cat are learning how to coexist. She is learning how to kind of, you know, make some adjustments. She's having to make some adjustments to her routine because taking care of a creature is a big responsibility and it's a whole big learning curve for her. And I've binged through 3 of the 8 volumes and I cannot wait to continue this series. What I actually loved most about it is that one of the things Wataru adds to the story is there will be a situation that happens that we see through Riko's eyes, and then afterwards there will be a page or 2 pages that show what was happening from the cat's point of view, and from that more animalistic standpoint where the cat just, you know, doesn't really understand why she's reacting the way she is, because to him it makes perfect sense. And the way it's drawn is really cute, and I love that that added detail is in there. And one of my favorite things about this series, outside of the story itself, is that the mangaka actually adopted a cat when they started working on the story, and it looks exactly like the cat in the story. And originally the cat was meant to be kind of the muse, to be a model, so the mangaka knew how to draw cats better, and that's just adorable, and I think it's really cute. So Cat Plus Gamer, highly recommend for anybody looking for a fast, very wholesome, funny, and deeper than expected little manga series. It's only 8 volumes, and I already bought volume 4 because I can't wait to continue. And last but not least, for my manga challenge, I read Your Letter by Hyun A. Cho. So at the beginning of this story, I was actually kind of expecting not to love it as much as I did, because it starts with a very similar premise to a lot of manga, a lot of manhwa, a lot of, you know, anime, where you have a young school age girl who is being bullied, and she starts over, transfers to a new school, and is hoping to get a fresh start. And she finds a letter taped to the bottom of her desk, which encourages her to go to a second location to find the second letter, and so on and so forth. This little graphic novel, first of all, visually, is absolutely beautiful. It is one of my favorites that I have read in a very long time. There's a sequence in here where the characters go swimming in a pond and you see them underwater, and it is so beautifully drawn. It is so beautifully drawn. It's one of my favorite panels I think I've ever seen in manga or manhwa. And it's just, it's so wholesome, and it's so joyful, and it's so sweet, but it has that deeper undertone that I always look for in stories like this, and it surprised me multiple times. So even though the premise was very familiar to me, the execution of it felt so fresh, and I loved it. And I know that this is a story that I will be reading with my kids. I know this is a story I will be rereading and going back to if I ever need a pick-me-up and something just wholesome and heartwarming. It's beautiful. I highly recommend this, you guys. I think it is absolutely a beautiful story, beautifully drawn. Huge shout out to the author of this, because it's a beautiful story. All right, let's move on to the non-manga that I read in March. I had 5 non-manga reads, and the first one was a continuation of a series, because I am determined to continue some series here in 2026 and even finish some. And Eyes of the Void was a step on that journey in March. This is book 2 of Adrian Tchaikovsky's sci-fi space opera, The Final Architecture. And Eyes of the Void, I don't know how I feel about this. There were definitely some things I enjoyed about it, do not get me wrong. I loved the expansion of the history of the world and going to different planets and getting some different cultures added to what we knew from book 1. Our main cast of characters does sort of split up a little bit more in book 2, which I didn't love, because you guys know Motley Crews are where it's at for me. And so anytime in a story there's a split of the party in any way, even if it's just one character going off and doing their own thing, I just don't love it as much. And the other thing about this is that where in book one, I felt a stronger character focus in the story, this one starts to veer more into concepts and the vastness of the universe and trying to understand the deeper questions of the cosmos, which, to be perfectly honest, is just not my jam. I'm not gonna lie. That kind of story just does not appeal to me. It's not that I don't care. Maybe I'm too lazy. I'm just too lazy to figure out the secrets of the universe, you guys. I'm not that bothered by it. It's huge, it's vast, and it's out there, and that's about where my interest ends. I realize I'm saying this in the middle of the Artemis 2 voyage, which is super cool, by the way. All of that kind of stuff, I think it's awesome, and I love just kind of keeping tabs on it. But when characters really start to try to unravel the mysteries of the vastness of space, I get bored. I'm gonna be honest, I just get bored, and I'm so sorry. I just get bored. I would say that my least favorite POV in the series so far got probably the most screen time and the most weight in book 2, which also did not help, because I just wasn't that interested in, again, the more conceptual direction of his story arc in here. So I am really hoping that reading book 3, hopefully in the next month here, goes back to a merge of that concept plus character. I want to go back to the characters, and what I'm afraid of is that we're just going to keep expanding further into the concepts, and it's going to be this big, massive concept climax at the end. And I don't know if that's going to be what I'm hoping for. I'm still liking Adrian Tchaikovsky's writing. I still like some of the characters a lot in here. Solace, if you know, you know, is still one of my favorite characters. She's essentially a battle angel. That's just really cool. But yeah, book 2 I did not like as much as book 1, and I'm very curious to see what the tone of book 3 is going to be, but I will let you guys know when I read it. This one's going to be hard for me to talk about just because I'm still articulating in my own head how I feel about it, and I do intend to make a video that isn't necessarily about this book, but it was kind of spawned by my reading of this book, and that is The Poet Empress by Shen Tao. This is a current darling of the book community. It is a new release, and it is an ambitious debut. It is such an ambitious debut. Our main character's name is Wei Yin. She is a young teenage girl, which is gonna matter for something I'm gonna say later, who in an ancient fantasy version of essentially like empirical China is brought in to be a concubine for the next crown prince. This is a brutal, brutal story. And the first thing I'm going to say about it, and this is something that I heard from several people before I read it, is that it is very falsely advertised as a dark romance or romantasy, fantasy romance, etc. This is not a romance, and I want to make that very clear to anyone who is going into this book expecting a romance. And I think it just goes to show how desperate for cash cows the publishing industry is to slap a romance title on a book that has the kind of content that this book has. It makes me really mad. We're going to talk more about that later. I think this is an ambitious debut, and I think that on a line-by-line basis, Shen Tao has a really beautiful, very engaging writing style. So my opinion about this, and this is one that I've gotten backlash on many times in the past, and I know it's unpopular in certain circles, I am of the opinion that in order for a book to be deep, thematic, rich, and honest, it does not need to have graphic, on-page abuse, torture, assault, insert other words here. I do not think that this book is made any more deep, thematic, raw, honest, etc. by having those things on page in explicit detail. And I actually think that it removed the rest of the tension of the story that the author was trying to include. For example, the author sets up a lot of supposed political tension. We have the promise of all this political tension, all of this tension in the household between all of the concubines and the servants and etc. And I've read and watched a ton of stories that take place in worlds very similar to this, whether it's historical or fantasy. And when all of the tension and all of the stakes is wrapped up in these physical, graphic scenes of abuse and etc., torture, etc., the political tension was basically non-existent, in my opinion, because every time our main character would go and ask somebody for something, in this supposed really cutthroat, nobody trusts anybody setting, she just got all the answers she wanted every single time. And so, like, you had this weird dichotomy between those two things, and the structure of the story didn't impress me as much as I was hoping. And this is one of the few times that I have leaned into the FOMO of a new release. And I do think that there is a lot in this book that shows the ambition and attention to craft of the author. I really do. But I think this book brings me back to a lot of conversations and a lot of problems that I have with on-page violence and how it's portrayed and how it is utilized by authors. There were several moments in this book that I felt were incredibly emotionally manipulative, and I didn't love that, and it made me really frustrated. I think the theme overall of the story that the author's trying to tackle and trying to explore is really fascinating. The idea that in order to destroy someone, you to this extent, you have to know them to a point where you might even love them, not in a romantic sense, but in a sense that you see who they are as a person, if that makes sense. And I get that. That whole theme, I think, is really fascinating. I just feel like, especially with the age of the main characters, not that it would be okay outside of that, but especially when we consider the fact that we are dealing with young teenage characters here, or at least a main character, and how graphic and explicit that on-page content was, that really disappointed me. And I do not believe that equals depth in a story. So yeah, that is all I'm going to say about that until I expand my thoughts in a more general sense, hopefully in the near future, because it has been too much time since I ruffled the feathers of people who really love that graphic, explicit content and equate it to depth in theme. So I said what I said. And this book is not the only reason that I'm frustrated with all of that. I don't know if that makes any sense, but we'll get to it. Anyways, moving on, my patron book pick for March was Persuasion by Jane Austen. My patrons never cease to surprise me with what they vote on. Not to say that I wasn't excited to read this, because I was. But they decided that we were going to read Persuasion in March. And this is my second Jane Austen read. I grew up with all the adaptations. I've mentioned that so many times. I can quote the 6-hour 1990s Pride and Prejudice miniseries basically from memory. But I haven't read any of the books, which is crazy. Still crazy. But Persuasion is now my second completed Jane Austen read. And this story is interesting for several reasons. First of all, it takes place with an older couple, a more mature couple, right? They're in their, I think, late 20s, early 30s. I think the Captain Wentworth is a little bit older. But it's an older couple, which already sets it apart from her other works. And also, this story is less humorous than her other stories, and it's more melancholy, reflective. The passion is a lot more subtle. It's a lot more there's a lot of yearning, don't get me wrong, but it's an interesting tonal shift from some of her other stories, which I think is really interesting, and it just goes to show the range that she had. I loved Anne as a main character. Anne is such a middle child who is trying to deal with just a honestly horrible family. Her family's awful, and she let the love of her life go. And she's full of regrets, right? And of course, as chance would have it, life throws them back into each other's orbit at some point, and the story continues. I really enjoyed this. I would say that while I really enjoyed Anne and Captain Wentworth as our two main protagonists of the story, The rest of the cast did not interest me nearly as much as it does in the other stories. So where in something like Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, even with Northanger Abbey, I was interested in the cast as a whole a lot more than I was in Persuasion. I didn't care about really anybody else. I didn't find them as intriguing or interesting. I didn't really have emotions of any kind about them. Other than being really annoyed on Anne's behalf. With that, I wanted a little bit more of something from the cast as a whole. Not from Anne and Captain Wentworth. I think there's a letter at the end of this book that is kind of an expression of love, a declaration of love that I think is absolutely brilliant. It's so passionate. It's so beautifully written. It's amazing. But outside of Anne and Captain Wentworth, I don't know. I was underwhelmed by the rest of the story, even by the locations in this story. I just didn't feel engaged by it outside of the main couple, which, again, like I said, the tonal focus of this book is very different than her other works, and I didn't dislike it. I just wanted more from everything outside of our main love interest couple. But I have now read my second Jane Austen novel, enjoyed it very much, and I'm really looking forward to the next one, which will be a story that I have more familiarity with, and I don't know which one that's going to be yet, but it will be probably either Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility. I'm not sure. I think I'm going to leave Emma for later. I don't know why. I just don't feel like reading Emma right now. She drives me a little bit bonkers. So I think it's going to be either Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility. But Persuasion is checked off of my classics bucket list, and I'm very glad to have read it. After that, I needed a reread. I needed a book that really just let me go back to a group of characters and a location that I knew I loved. And so I decided to reread Six of Crows with my good friend Casey from Bookishly Bookish, because she was reading it for the first time. This I read years and years and years ago, and I loved it then, and I still love it. Is it a perfect book? Absolutely not. However, it is one of my favorite Motley Crews. I loved the heist, I loved the world, I loved the magic, and it is odd to me that I have not ever read anything of Leigh Bardugo's beyond this duology, but if I never do, I'm okay with that. Like, I love this duology, and I'm really looking forward to rereading Crooked Kingdom again in the near future. But Six of Crows it has some very similar vibes to Lies of Locke Lamora. This is technically advertised as YA. I think that's a little bit meh. I don't know that we're on stable footing on that category. I would say it falls more in the new adult, since that's a category apparently. But I really love this. I think that the Motley Crew is so organic. The characters feel so real. The dialogue feels so natural and real, which I love, because that is actually really hard to do, especially when you have a high stakes, fast-paced heist kind of story situation like this, and the characters never suffer for it, which is something I love about this story. Kaz is a great main character, and Inej and like Matthias and Nina and Jasper, everybody, Wylan, the whole crew, I have missed them. I've missed them so much. This was such a fun read. Crooked Kingdom has one of my favorite romantic scenes ever in a story, and I can't wait to get back to it. It's something very, very subtle, and I don't even know that a lot of people would even consider that as like, oh wow, this is so romantic. It's so beautiful. I can't wait to get back to it. So, reread of Six of Crows went really well, really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I took a little bit of time to go back to an old favorite. And finally, I know this was a huge stack, you guys. This is a huge reading month. I don't know what it is about March, but for some reason, March is always a big reading month for me. It was last year too, and I don't know what it is about March, but we read a lot of books. Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee is a novella, standalone novella, that was the last thing that I read in March. Now, this is so interesting because obviously it is night and day difference from the Greenbone Saga. This does not have anything to do with that world, with those characters. This is a fantasy about a girl named Esther who goes to the royal muse and becomes a giant rock handler. Now, the rock are these massive predatory birds. It's kind of, think of hawking or falconry, but just with massive fantasy birds, which is super cool. And she becomes a handler for her own bird. And their job is to find and hunt and kill manticores, which are these horrifying kind of demon-spawned creatures that prey upon human villages throughout the land, and they are very, very deadly. And I don't know what my expectation, I don't know that I had expectations going into this other than just wanting to read more of Fonda Lee's incredible imaginative mind. And this really surprised me. I enjoyed this a lot. The story, and I would say it wasn't until the last third of the novella that it really clicked in for me, and I was like, wow, I really like what she did with this. I really like what she did with this. I think this is such a strongly structured novella. I was super impressed by that because it is really difficult to tell an emotionally engaging story in that short of an amount of pages. And she had my emotional investment so early on in this story. I was so enraptured by the obvious research that she had done into things like falconry to make, you know, this craft and this occupation that these handlers have so real, and showing us the steps it takes to earn the trust of a creature like this. It's so cool. It didn't surprise me. I was expecting it to be good, but it surprised me how much I loved it. And I think it might be one of my favorite novellas. It's just really fantastic, and I love it, and I would love to read it again at some point because I'm still kind of reeling from the ending of this a little bit. But yeah, highly recommend. I think this is a fantastic, fantastic fantasy standalone, and because it's so short, it's a perfect palate cleanser. Highly recommend. And I think it's always cool when an author decides to go outside the box a little bit and play with fantasy creatures that we don't see explored as often in the genre. So picking a book of the month, this was actually kind of tricky because I read several that I absolutely loved, and I do not count rereads, so Six of Crows was not in the running for read of the month, but I think I am going to give it to Your Letter by Hyun A. Cho. I loved this, you guys. I needed this kind of wholesome, just perfect amount of depth, perfect amount of beautiful visuals matching a beautiful, wholesome, heartwarming story of friendship and belonging and never giving up on your friends and the joy of discovering something new. There's just so many things to this little book that I absolutely loved, down to the tiniest details. I highly recommend this. I'm going to be rereading it again. Like I said, I loved it. So highly recommend that. That is my book of the month. And that concludes everything that I read in March. I would love to know down in the comments below. Let me know what you read in March. What was your favorite book? How is your month going? How are you feeling? How are you doing? How's 2026 treating you? I have really missed you guys the last few weeks, and I'm excited to be back talking to you about books, reading amazing books, because that is part of that is the legacy that my grandfather left me. He was a big reason why I became a storyteller, why I love stories so much, and why I love the kind of stories that I love. It's really nice to know that you guys are out there and that you care and that we can share this amazing love of storytelling together. So I hope you're having a fabulous week. I hope you are reading some 5-star reads. Tell your loved ones that you love them, because we're never guaranteed a tomorrow, and you should definitely take every opportunity to tell them how much that they mean to you. And I will see you in the next video.